Dead men tell no tales, but their ships speak volumes. Welcome to the Cursed Compass, where we explore the darkest maritime mysteries.
This map of Lake Huron marks a site 16 miles off Harbor Beach, plunging 210 feet. Sonar reveals the Minnedosa resting upright, missing all four masts. At the bow, its primary towing post was violently sheared off. On the night of October 20th, 1905, the Minnedosa was physically tethered to a lead steamer when it vanished instantly. The only evidence recovered by the surviving ships was that single wooden post, still attached to the tow cable, bearing the marks of an axe. This schematic shows the ship as it was built in Kingston in 1890. At 250 feet long, with a 36-foot beam, it was the largest Canadian-built sailing vessel on the Great Lakes at the time of its launch. Its massive scale fueled maritime folklore, with sailors claiming to see its four ghostly masts silhouetted against the moonlight long after it was lost. To understand why a 1,000-ton vessel disappeared so abruptly, we have to look past the ghost stories and examine the physical and economic forces acting on the hull. The sinking of the Minnedosa provides a specific look at what happens when aging wooden architecture is modified to meet the demands of an industrial transport system it wasn't designed for. By 1890, the era of wooden sail was already ending. The rise of larger, more efficient steel freighters meant that a ship like the Minnedosa was effectively obsolete from the day it was launched. To keep these older ships profitable, owners began using them as consort barges, passive cargo containers towed in long chains behind a single steamship. The financial incentive was significant. Converting a ship to a barge allowed the owners to cut the operating crew from 12 sailors down to just 7. This photograph shows the industrial reality of the Great Lakes at the time. These multi-ship tow systems were massive and cumbersome, requiring crews to navigate heavy loads through the tight confines of canal locks with very little room for error. In 1903, the owners finalized this transition for the Minnedosa. Its masts were cut down, removing its sails and transforming the once towering schooner into a utilitarian barge. These records confirmed that by 1905, the ship had a flat, empty deck, a fact that directly contradicts the sightings of ghostly masts reported in maritime legends. But removing the masts came with a catastrophic trade-off. Without its sails, the Minnedosa lost all independent propulsion. It could no longer steer or maneuver to avoid a hazard on its own. The ship was no longer a self-contained vessel. It was now a dependent part of a larger mechanical chain, entirely at the mercy of the steamer at the front of the line. On October 18, 1905, the Minnedosa began its final voyage from Fort William, Ontario, carrying a massive payload. This cross-section models the weight of 75,000 bushels of wheat. That volume weighed approximately 1,041 tons. This weight drastically reduced the ship's freeboard, leaving only a thin sliver of exposed hull above the surface. A ship with low freeboard is unable to rise over incoming waves. Instead, the water washes directly across the deck. The Minnedosa had already proven vulnerable to this. In 1892, while it was still a schooner, wave action alone was strong enough to sweep the deck and severely injure a mate. Loading 1,041 tons of grain into the hull made this vulnerability lethal. Any significant storm would ensure that the lake would wash entirely over the vessel. The ships moved from Lake Superior through the Sault Ste. Marie locks on October 19th, heading south towards Saginaw Bay as the weather began to turn. This top-down model shows the steamer Westmount leading the chain, connected to the Minnedosa, towing the Melrose behind. Caught in the middle, the Minnedosa was under immense tension, pulled forward with massive drag from behind. Late on October 20, the convoy was hit by high winds, freezing temperatures, and heavy snow. With freeboard compromised by the heavy grain, the Minnedosa couldn't ride the storm swells. Churning waves crashed repeatedly over the wooden deck. Near Harbor Beach, the connection failed. The Minnedosa disappeared from the middle of the tow line. The crew on the trailing Melrose suddenly found themselves adrift in the storm. Their forward tow cable had been severed. When the Westmount pulled in its end of the cable, they found the Minnedosa's forward towing post still attached. It was covered in deep axe marks. Trapped by the tension of the two cables and unable to maneuver, the sinking Minnedosa had become a 1,000-ton anchor. If the crew hadn't cut it loose, the weight of the water-filled hull would have likely dragged the entire convoy to the bottom. The forensic evidence reveals the crew's final moments. As the hull took on fatal amounts of water, they realized the ship was doomed and made a choice to save the others. They used axes to chop through their own towing post and cut the rear line to the Melrose, instantly breaking the tension that was holding the three ships together. This sacrifice allowed the Melrose to drift safely until it was recovered the next morning. On October 26th, the two surviving ships arrived here at Kingston. The Minnedosa's crew had ensured the rest of the convoy reached its destination. The storm that night was one of the worst on record, wrecking at least 11 ships and damaging a dozen more across the Great Lakes. The sinking was the result of a heavily loaded wooden hull, a loss of freeboard, and the rigid tension of the midline tow configuration. When the storm hit, these mechanical factors converged to create a terminal failure. The loss of the Minnedosa and its 9 crew members stands as a metric for the risks of the Great Lakes shipping transition, a period where aging vessels were pushed to their physical breaking points to satisfy the demands of a new industrial age.